As the war in Gaza continues, and with the United States sending billions of dollars in military aid to Israel,
the Biden administration reportedly preparing a new billion-dollar arms transfer to Israel.
University students across America are speaking up and getting shut down by the educational institutions that are supposed to protect them.
It's so disheartening to see that the country I was born and raised in is making people suffer in such a terrible way.
Politicians who have voiced support for a ceasefire say they too are being targeted, censored, and silenced.
The United States Senate will do everything possible to help Israel win.
As the U.S. faces one of the most consequential presidential elections yet, is it we the people who will make the decisions, or is it the Israel lobby who will call the shots?
I have to do something. We have to do something.
I've come to Arizona State University in Phoenix. It's one of the colleges where students have been protesting the war in Gaza.
Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
Despite the American constitutional right to freedom of speech, these protests are being shut down. And when the police were called to the one here in Phoenix, more than 20 people were arrested. Law student Zara is one of them.
I'm a freshman at the Arizona State University and I'm currently studying business law. So right now we're across the Arizona State University campus because I'm currently suspended from stepping foot on campus. So in relation to us, the protest is around across campus. It was on the old main lawn. And I'd say there are around 100 or so protesters and around 60 to 70 of us arrested.
Zara is not the first one in her family to protest.
So this keffiyeh was actually given to me by my mom. She's been protesting Palestine since she was in college, and she wore the same one when she was protesting.
How does that make you feel that when she was protesting back in college, she was protesting for a free Palestine, and now, all these years later, you're still trying to protest for the same issue?
So honestly, it does suck that that's still taking so long for people to wake up and really for justice to be served. But it also, I believe that people are only growing stronger in their beliefs and in their sense of justice, and the movement's only growing bigger. And my mom's been fighting since 30 years ago, and she will continue fighting just like the rest of us.
Today, Zara's meeting with lawyers David Shami and Zayed Al-Sayed, who are working on behalf of students who were arrested on charges of trespassing. David has filed a lawsuit on their behalf.
The actions of the university were very clearly targeted at the people who were exercising their First Amendment rights to protest and to seek redress from their government, right? Those students were asking their government to do something, to stop being complicit in the genocide of the Palestinian people.
Free Palestine! Palestine will be free! From the river to the sea!
97% of the protests have remained nonviolent. Despite that, thousands of protesters have been arrested, including faculty members and professors on over 60 campuses. Zayed is Palestinian and has family in Gaza. He says there is a widening crackdown on free speech when it comes to the war.
I lived in Palestine for 2 years. I actually lived there from when I was about 10 years old. I went to school, did 2 years in second grade and third grade in Palestine, in the West Bank. But I have an aunt, my mom's sister, who is in Gaza.
What is that like, sitting here right now in a country where they're cracking down on protests supporting Palestine, watching what's happening in Palestine, watching the US response? What is that like?
I'm American. I'm born in America, raised in America. I spoke English before I spoke Arabic. This is home. My family, and all families, all people who immigrate into this country, they come for freedoms. To see that those freedoms are being ripped away from us, they're being taken away from us, it's disgusting. It's horrible. Why is it that the restrictions are being placed on us when all we're doing is educating the public and showing the people how our families are being murdered, our people are being killed, and they want to stop us from educating people to show them the realities that are happening? I've lost a cousin and her 2 kids as a result of Israeli missile strikes in Gaza. Dead. My cousin was 23 years old. She had a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. She died holding them when Israel bombed where they were at. What do you expect? What, am I going to sit here and just smile? I have to do something. We have to do something.
Zayed is representing 4 Muslim students who had their hijabs forcibly removed upon their arrest, an act he says was against their constitutional freedoms. He brought them new hijabs to wear while they were being detained.
You know, that's something that she's worn for years, since middle school. These are college-age students. I think she's 19. She's been wearing a hijab for, probably 6-7 years. And for her to be paraded around without a hijab, by it being taken away from her, that's a violation. She felt violated.
Aza Abu Sif is with the Council on American Islamic Relations, a civil rights organization founded to combat Islamophobia.
The Muslim women are in the forefront of being discriminated against in the Muslim community. They're easily identifiable, which makes them a target for Islamophobes and discrimination/hate crimes. These women were stripped out of their dignity, and they were put in such a vulnerable state.
Arizona State University professor Jonathan Udelman was caught on camera harassing and assaulting a Muslim student at a protest. Udelman has since been fired for his behavior.
You man, get whoa. Here.
Yeah, who invited you here?
Yeah.
Go back to jihad. Go.
Hate crime!
They're not working.
Hate crime! Crime right here!
I could not believe I was seeing this in actual, flesh, that one of the professors in a higher institution was actually harassing one of the students, a place where we hold professors to be, to have higher standards, open mind. It's an educational institution. There's freedom of speech in educational institutions. The fact that he was able to harass this woman blew my mind.
Do you think that there's a rise in Islamophobia on the campuses of American universities?
Yes, I think there's an increased wave of Islamophobia on American campuses, but crises usually brings up the Islamophobia. Whenever there's a crisis mode, you get to see people for their true colors.
Protesters say that they want transparency. They want colleges to declare any financial ties with Israel and end these partnerships. Students say that the Israel lobby has no place in American education.
Can you explain how Israeli lobbying in AIPAC has impacted the response to these pro-Palestinian protests across the country?
I can tell you that the Israeli lobby is pretty strong in this country. I don't think there's anyone who doesn't know that if they follow politics, even in the slightest. And even our state legislature has gone on to pass laws that make it unlawful to boycott Israel. So we have an anti-boycott law here in Arizona. So I think there's a great deal of fear if you take any position against the state of Israel and their actions of being called anti-Semitic, right? And I think that does a real disservice to real anti-Semitism, right? There really is anti-Semitism that exists in this world, in this country, in this state. But the people who are really facing anti-Semitism are harmed when you conflate anti-Semitism with criticism of Israel or anti-Israeli policies.
We don't want our tuition to be going to a genocide. We don't want a bloody degree when we graduate. And also, we need this university to drop all charges against student organizers and unsuspend students who have just basically been carrying out their First Amendment rights to freedom of speech and assembly.
Can you describe some of the police crackdowns and other encampments across the country and tell me how you feel about that?
I mean, it's disgusting seeing what went down at Columbia. I mean, the aggression, one student was forcibly arrested and a knee was placed on his neck.
The U.S. is willing to violate its own laws, just as members of Congress are willing to burn the Constitution to protect Israel. This is a problem with our politics. I would say we have a failure of democracy in this country, but the students here, they are the hope for saving democracy because they're willing to stand against the establishment and speak truth to power.
What role do you think organizations like AIPAC have in that death of democracy that you were just talking about?
I think generally there's a bigger problem with the role of money and politics. Democracy is supposed to be about people being represented, not deep pockets being represented. Organizations that are pro-Israeli, whether it's the Christians United for Israel or AIPAC, are both the product of U.S. foreign policy. In other words, because U.S. foreign policy is so pro-Israel, it gives more power to these kinds of organizations. But it also works to maintain the status quo.
The student protests first started at Columbia University in New York City and ignited a wave of similar pro-Palestine encampments at universities across the country. New York City is home to the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. The city also has the largest metropolitan Muslim community in North America. The Israel-Palestine conflict feels like a local issue here. Since the war between Israel and Hamas began on October 7th, tensions here have been high. The conflict has become a key political issue, and in New York, it's even taken over local politics. I'm here to understand how the situation 6,000 miles away has such influence and what that means for Americans. My first stop, the Upper East Side. It is a largely Jewish neighborhood, but at this cafe, some staff members walked out after the owner put up an Israeli flag. It sparked an immediate outpouring of support from many locals who felt the boycott was anti-Semitic.
Do you think it's important for the shop and other businesses around here to have Israeli flags up?
Yes, because if we don't speak up and we don't use our voices, then we know what can happen.
It's always been difficult to be Jewish. It's just become harder.
Do you think there's enough American support for Israel?
I think you can't give enough support to Israel because I know they're not trying to hurt innocent people. That's not their vibe. That's not their MO. That's not what they want.
People at the cafe tell me that political views go hand in hand with their cultural and religious identities.
Do you think that being Jewish and supporting Israel are one and the same?
Absolutely.
So you feel that the IDF response in Gaza is justified, it's well within?
Absolutely. When everyone's like, oh, like the poor Palestinian children, it's like, let's take a step back. This might sound terrible, but it's just war. Like, I'm sorry that's happened, but it's just war.
We as Jewish people are even more disturbed and pained. We are embarrassed when all of this is being done, supposedly in our name.
Not all Jewish New Yorkers express such unequivocal support for Israel. A poll done by Siena College shows that opposition to Israel's attack on Gaza is growing here in New York. But politics tell a different story.
AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee. It was incorporated in 1963. For 10 years prior to that, it was known as the American Zionist Committee for Public Affairs. AIPAC calls itself America's pro-Israel lobby.
In November last year, AIPAC delivered more than $3.7 million to the campaigns of U.S. lawmakers, the most it has ever given in a single month. In Bay Ridge, a predominantly Muslim neighborhood, the scene is very different from the Upper East Side, a reminder of how this city is a microcosm of the fractured Middle East. I've come to chat more about politics with Kareem El-Rifai, who is the chair of the Palestine Committee at the Democratic Socialist Party of America.
I think one of the things that the Israel lobby has been really effective in doing is funding politicians in both parties. And there's certainly a bipartisan consensus. You have Democrats and Republicans, like 480 of them in Congress, all on the exact same side of this. And it almost feels silly to say we're at a high watermark when we have 35, I think, people signed up for a ceasefire resolution.
Kareem believes that speaking up for Palestine comes at a cost for both regular citizens and for politicians.
Palestinian protests here have been really escalated by police in a way that, is pretty unique. When I first came down here to Bay Ridge, I was able to find the rallies because of the drones that were flying overhead, keeping an eye on the protesters. And police were doing what we call kettling, where they basically surround the protesters on all sides and kind of force them into an area where, there's really nowhere to escape, and get into just more and more brutal tactics. So they're treated pretty heavily down here.
Since October 7th, the Israel lobby has worked hard to influence people in power. Members of Congress who were supportive of Israel at the start of the Gaza war received at least $100,000 more on average from pro-Israel donors than those who supported Palestine. How has AIPAC and the Israeli lobby in the U.S. affected the American political system?
Yeah, AIPAC has been uniquely effective at using campaign finance laws to really drive fealty towards Israel in a way that not a lot of other special interest groups have really been able to. They have been able to basically fund politicians on both sides, Republicans, Democrats, especially in competitive races. They find ways to make sure that they're funded, they keep them happy.
And what's the end goal for the lobby, for AIPAC? What are they trying to get out of these politicians?
I think it's basically it's putting up that wall of silence where as long as your campaign stays funded, as long as you stay in office, you're not going to say anything about the occupation that could be deemed negative, right? And as soon as politicians break that, they really come down hard on them, either start funding their opponents or start funding really anybody that would be effective in starting to take them down. I absolutely think that AIPAC has become more aggressive since October 7th. I think in large part because of the fact that there are now politicians who are bravely speaking out. And kind of breaking that wall of silence for the first time in a meaningful way. AIPAC recently announced that they're going to fund the opponents of several DSA-backed and just progressive candidates in the next couple months to try to unseat them in November.
The U.S.-Israel relationship is not just a Democratic or Republican value. It's not just a progressive or conservative value. It is an American value encoded in our national DNA.
The largest recipient of AIPAC's money in November last year was New York Democrat Richie Torres, who received more than $200,000 in donations.
Here we go again, sending $17.6 billion U.S. tax dollars with no conditions attached to Netanyahu's extremist government to drop more bombs on innocent Palestinians.
Torres was also one of 22 Democrats who voted with Republicans to endorse a resolution to censure the only Palestinian-American politician in Congress, Rashida Tlaib, after she called for the destruction of the state of Israel. I'm heading to Malika, a safety center for women, to visit its founder, Rana Abdelhamed. Rana is a New Yorker born and raised in Queens. She ran for office, but says her campaign was cut short due to racist gerrymandering. Gerrymandering means that the boundaries of an electoral constituency are manipulated or changed to achieve a certain result.
I ran a really successful race. We mobilized thousands of people. We raised close to $1 million from small dollar contributions from a working class community. And then ultimately, just a couple of months before I was supposed to be on the ballot, the district was split into two. So it diluted our voice, like literally right in half. Our community was broken, and we lost an opportunity to have that representation, which really would have benefited. The redistricting, the way it manifested in this neighborhood, is rooted in, again, a history of racist gerrymandering that we have seen unfold across the United States, where people who are holding power unfortunately choose their voters versus voters choosing their representatives.
Do you think that the amount of money that the Israeli lobby is spending getting members of Congress elected is affecting the American response to the war in Gaza?
People take money from various groups, one of those groups being AIPAC. And if a group has a lot of money, then a group will influence the way in which an elected will view or act on or vote on a certain topic. And that's what we're seeing across the country. The day that several elected members of Congress stood for a ceasefire bill, AIPAC made a $200 million or $100 million commitment in terms of ensuring that there's a primary challenger in those races that they're running in. That is how, I'm like, how is that a fair race? How is that a democratic race? How is that allowing us as the United States government to build a foreign policy agenda that is rooted in our interests, human rights, right? Values that we say.
Do you think that we have a biased leadership in the United States right now?
Yes, I think we have a biased leadership in the United States right now.
Rana has actively organized events to support a ceasefire, both in New York and nationally.
I think that there's a level of dehumanization that has been assigned to Arab people and to Palestinian people specifically. So when you think about Palestinians and the dehumanization of Palestinians, it's deeply tied to a racist understanding of who Arabs are and who Palestinians are and who sometimes Muslims are, and sometimes like even trying to extrapolate that, okay, no, they're actually Christian, so maybe you shouldn't harm them that much because they're Christian too. And so it's just a very, like, we almost feed into that narrative, even as we're trying to fight it. And I think it does show up, the racism, dehumanization a lot in the way people, both at a congressional and the US, right, when people are like, level them.
I tried to make contact with AIPAC and put some of Rana and Kareem's points to them, but AIPAC consistently ignored my requests for an interview. So instead, I'm headed back to DC to get the view of someone who has worked in Israel's government for more than 2 decades. Dan Arbel is the former deputy chief of mission at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., a current scholar in residence at American University, and a 25-year veteran of the Israeli Foreign Service.
Since October 7th, donations by AIPAC have hit a record high. Can you give a little bit of background on where that money is coming from and how that process works from the money getting to AIPAC and then ending up with politicians?
It's private individuals that are either members of AIPAC or have, regard AIPAC's work important, and they, in the limits of what the law permits, they make contributions. I don't think that AIPAC is over-aggressive. I don't think AIPAC is paralyzing. It's doing what it is allowed to do, and it's doing it very effectively.
AIPAC maintains it receives no financial assistance from Israel or any other foreign group. It funnels money through the United Democracy Project, or UDP, that avoids mention of its creation by AIPAC and seeks to decide elections by funding campaign messages about many issues. The money flows from AIPAC to the UDP and into the hands of Israel-friendly politicians.
Rashida Tlaib was censured on the House floor, in part because of her comments in support of Palestine and Hamas. How do you feel about that?
I think that Rashida Tlaib was censored, rightfully so. I think that her views, while they fall under the freedom of speech, do not represent official U.S. policy, and actually diverge from official U.S. policy. Unfortunately, she did say those words, and I think that rightfully she was censored.
As we move into this election year, we look now at how the powerful lobby group, AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, is set to spend more than $100 million against progressive Congress members critical of Israeli human rights violations in Palestine. The goal is to remove members of the squad from Congress this year, including Congress members Cori Bush, Ilhan Omar, Jamal Bowman, Summer Lee, and the only Palestinian-American member of Congress, Rashida Tlaib.
98% of AIPAC-supported candidates won their general elections in 2022. As America teeters on the edge of an election like no other, money does matter. The Israel lobby is funding primary challenges to members of Congress who have supported a ceasefire in Gaza. So when lobbying groups are able to silence politicians, who is the government truly accountable to?